All right, hey everybody, we're going to pick up with Kiev and Russia from 900 to 1200. So take a look at the map, notice the location. Notice, yes, the trade. Very nice. Very nice. Focus, focus. Trade is very important in Kiev and Russia. The people who were living in Russia, there were many different ecosystems and people. And the Slavs moved into the lower river valleys around 500. And Vikings arrive using the river system as well. They set up state based on trade and conquest around the 9th century. And the capital of this state, which was founded by Rurik, was at Kiev. And these people were called the Rus. And they may have been Scandinavians, Slavs, Finns, Balts, or some mixture of the four. And the Russian territory includes the Black and Caspian Seas in the south to the Baltic and White Seas in the north. And these people were a nomadic Turkish people called the Khazars who settled in the north shore of Crimea. Bulgars formed their own state along the Volga in the 10th century, and the Rus used gold dinars and silver dirhams from the Abbasid Empire as their currency. So, as you can see, it is a very, very diverse area that is going to focus, for the most part, on trade. You have forest dwellers, steppe nomads, and farmers in the various ecological zones who trade with each other, and long distance caravan trade links Russia to the Silk Road. In 980, Vladimir I became the Grand Prince of Kiev. And he chose Orthodox Christianity as the religion of his state and imitated the culture of the Byzantine Empire. So the government built churches, adopted the Cyrillic alphabet, and Vladimir made sure that his trade oriented towards the Byzantines. Part of the reason for their decline was the fact that it was a very diverse area. And internal political struggle and conflict with external foes led to a decline of Kiev and Russia around 1100. The reason that Kiev and Russia focused so much on trade is because, for one thing, it's a colder region. There's a very short growing season, but there was also very poor land for farming. And because the region was cut off, the farming technology that was available wasn't very good. As a result of all of this, food production is very low. So the political power of the state relied more on trade than landholding. And the major cities of Kiev and Novgorod had populations of 30,000 to 50,000, which is a lot smaller than Constantinople or large Muslim cities under the Abbasids. The smaller urban areas were centers for craftspeople and artisans whose social status was higher than that of peasants. Christianity slowly spread in the Kievan state. Pagan customs and polygamy persisted until as late as the 12th century. And in the 12th century, Christianity triumphed and the church became incredibly powerful, with a number of clergy members actually functioning as tax collectors for the government. Technology that was available were improved plows, water mills, horses, collars, and the horseshoe. And because of this new technology, Western Europe begins experiencing an economic revival. And crop rotation, as well as the 3-field system, where 2 fields have crops, 1 field has oats, the oats replenish the soil, allows for a massive growth in population. In 800, there were 29 million people. By 1300, there were 79 million people. And population growth led to urbanization, which is where you have the birth of these major cities, London, Paris. And some towns began challenging the authority of their feudal lord, which is kind of a big deal. Urbanization increased specialization of labor. And all of this might sound familiar because we've talked about it in many other empires and civilizations. Now, this is why I've been telling you all year that in the grand scheme of world history, Europe doesn't really play a big role in it. Greece and Rome, yeah, they do, but Europe as a whole, not really. And this is why, because all of the things that are happening in Western Europe in this time period, what we're looking at in 1000, in 1200, are urbanization, specialization of labor, beginning of manufacturing. This has already happened in every other civilization that we've discussed, going back to, think about the Zhou, think about the Assyrians, the Babylons. It's already happened. Well, now it's finally happening in Western Europe. The specialization of labor focused on manufacturing, including wool textiles, which were dominated by Italy and Flanders. Flanders is modern day Belgium. Increased manufacturing leads to increased trade. Italian merchants dominated trade in the Mediterranean. Eventually, they do strike a deal with the Ottomans. They trade with each other. The rest of Europe gets those goods from Italy. Obviously, there's a major price increase because Italy has them and nobody else does. This domination of the Mediterranean Sea is what will eventually lead to the age of exploration led by Portugal and Spain, and then eventually the Netherlands, England, and France join in too. But we'll talk a lot more about that later. Increased involvement in the Afro-Eurasian trade network, including the Silk Road and Trans-Saharan trade, but you also have the Hanseatic League promoting trade in Northern Europe. This is where you have a lot of those Scandinavian and the Baltic regions coming together to unite in trade. Independent, self-governing cities emerged in Italy and Flanders. And what you really have is not going to be one unified kingdom. It's a number of city-states. And they rely on manufacturing and trade for their income. They had legal independence, so their laws could favor manufacturing and trade. That's one of the perks of not being a unified kingdom, is you have a lot of liberty. You have control by people who are not royalty. That being said, though, you will always have corruption. Whether you've got a king or whether it's the Medici family, you will always, always have corruption. In Italy, Venice emerges as a dominant sea power. They're trading in Muslim ports for spices and other goods. And in Flanders, cities like Ghent imported wool from England and wove it into a very fine cloth for export. The recovery of trade was accompanied by an increase in the high-value gold and silver coins, which really hadn't been used in early medieval Europe. During the mid-12th century, Europeans finally begin minting first silver and then gold coins. Ah, yes, the Crusades. There are a series of Christian military campaigns against Muslims in the Eastern Mediterranean, and they occur between 1095 and 1204. And factors that caused the crusade included the Christian church's desire to limit warfare between other Christians. So really, you've got Catholics versus the Orthodox. They want to limit that, so they find a common enemy. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Knights' willingness to engage in church-sanctioned warfare, because if God says it's okay to kill someone, it's okay. The desire for land on the part of younger sons of European nobility, because by law, it was the oldest son who inherited everything, not just the lands, the wealth, and the title, which is probably the most important thing. So if you had 4 sons, 3 of those 4 sons were left out in the cold. An interest in trade, don't forget, it was Italy and the Muslims, eventually the Ottoman Empire, who controls the Mediterranean Sea. They want in. The tradition of pilgrimages, Muslim control of Christian religious sites, and the Byzantine Empire's request for help against the Muslims, combined with all of the above factors, made the Holy Land the focus of the Crusades. And in 1095, Pope Urban II initiated the First Crusade when he called upon the Europeans to stop fighting each other and fight the Muslims instead. And that's actually one of the sources that we're going to read, is this speech that he gives, and he really demonizes the Ottomans. And when we read this, I want you to look for the bias. It's not that hard to find. The Crusades had a limited cultural impact on the Muslim world, but some real political significance. However, what was more significant was that the Crusades ended that little mini isolation period that Europe was in. When we said that no knowledge was getting over there, they were in that very sad, um, medieval period. And the Arabic and Greek manuscripts gave Europeans their first access to the works of the ancient Greek philosophers. And don't forget, it was the Arabs who saved these Greek texts. They translated them into Arabic and then they end up back in Europe. The Crusades did have a significant impact on the lifestyle of European nobles because they were constantly sending people out to fight. Cathedral schools became universities, and this is where you have the University of Paris, Oxford University, yada yada yada. You have a rediscovery of works of Aristotle, again, because they had been saved by the Muslims, and by the Arabs who came before the Muslims. New intellectual movements combining Aristotle's logic with Christianity created a very unique system looking for the truth that would be called scholasticism. However, some reformers in the church were worried about the materialism of the church. I mean, vow of poverty doesn't make sense that there's a priest who is drinking wine from a goblet every night that is encrusted with diamonds and rubies and made of gold. We'll see about that. Think about this, though. That's what's going to lead the Protestant Reformation. It just takes time. We also have the Spanish Reconquista, aka the Spanish Inquisition. And it begins in small states in northern Spain because don't forget the surviving Umayyad dynasty is still on the Iberian Peninsula. By 1150, Christians had recaptured over half of the land from Muslims in Spain. And they were aided by organization and wealth of the Catholic Church. So, rulers of Spain are often called crusaders of the faith. Queen Isabella, who ends the Reconquista in 1492, is named Crusader of the Faith. And it's pretty much one of the highest honors that somebody who is not actually a clergyman can get. And Ferdinand and Isabel end the Reconquista in 1492, the conquest of Granada. Think back earlier to the Alhambra picture that I showed you. And once Isabel and Ferdinand unite the majority of Spain under their rule, the next thing they do is drive out anybody who is not Catholic. Not even Christian, Catholic. And there are options. So if you're Jewish, if you're a Muslim, your options include conversion, get out, or face the fire of the Inquisition. And they developed horrific means of torture that if you are interested in, you can visit the Torture Museum in Amsterdam. Never been personally, but they have a lot of the original materials that were used during the Inquisition. So, maps of the Crusades, Latin Christianity versus Greek Christianity versus Islam. Notice how diverse by 1096 the world was in terms of religion. Bubonic plague, round 2. The Silk Road spread the plague across Eurasia in the 14th century. October 1947. Picture it. A ship from Crimea sailed into Messina, and the crew had a sickness clinging to their very bones. Yeah, they were all dead. Rats who were carrying fleas got on the shore. This boat shows up. Everyone's like, no, get out, get out. But it was too late. The rats got off the boat, carrying the fleas, spread it along. And increased trade. So the interdependence of these empires and kingdoms due to trade helps to spread the plague. Very close proximity, unsanitary conditions that are in the city facilitate the spread. When you are pooing into a small chamber pot and you throw it out the window, you're not exactly living in what I like to call a sanitary location. 25 million people died in the next several years, reducing about a fourth to a third of Europe's population. But in 200 years, the population bounces back. Notice the spread of the Black Death. It's really not that funny. It's a very painful way to die. We'll talk more about that in class if you guys want. I don't want to horrify you with the finer details, but that's what happened to you if you got the Black Death. Victims ate lunch with their friends and dinner with their ancestors in paradise. And Just so y'all know, the Black Death, the bubonic plague, does still exist. It is still around. People still get it today. If you want to look at this chart, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll talk more about it in class. Impact of the plague. It did end feudal Europe, though. Here's the thing. Labor became scarce in some places because obviously the number one population affected are the peasants who live in very close confines and poor sanitary conditions. Tenants, rent payers made gains as feudal obligations were lowered, and some serfs were freed to keep them from running away to better opportunities, and then they were paid for that. Wages rose in towns to keep workers happy because if you don't have enough people, competition, it's all about supply and demand, and it might seem callous to look at laborers as supply, but they are the labor supply. When the supply of laborers goes down and demand stays the same, suddenly it's all about competition. Who can pay more? We have options. What? It's crazy. It's madness. But I love this quote by Robert Allen. The path to the Industrial Revolution began with the Black Death. The population fall increased labor mobility by creating many vacant farms, and that mobility undermined the entire serf system. So there's something to think about. Have a great night, guys. Cheers.